to Rough Point Museum, the Newport home of Doris Duke, and welcome to our next edition of Myth and Mystique of Doris Duke, where we explore some of the more complex, confounding, and compelling aspects of Doris Duke's life and legacy. My name is Gina Tangora, and I'm the Interpretation and Visitor Experience Manager for the Museums of the Newport Restoration Foundation. Tonight, we will take a closer look at Doris Duke's fine and decorative art collection at Rough Point, and Doris as a collector. Today, when you visit Rough Point, it is largely as Doris left it before her death. But during the 20th century, the house and the objects in it were not static. The collection developed over the years, and Doris was constantly rearranging it to suit her taste and evolving style. So let's take a closer look at some objects from the collection and the provenance to learn more about Doris. Join us as we explore the Rough Point collection, listen to stories about special objects, and meet the women collectors whose tastes and collectors' eyes parallel Doris's own passion for collecting. And now, let's begin in the Great Hall. This room serves as an introduction to Rough Point and an introduction to the Duke family. When you look around the room, you will see objects purchased by Doris Duke's parents, James and Natalie Duke, as well as objects acquired and displayed by Doris. This room is filled with references to collecting and collections, including this curiosity cabinet, meant to show off curious and marvelous objects. Doris today is known as a collector, and visitors come to Rough Point in part to see the collection of fine and decorative arts. But this was not the case while Doris was alive. So let's take a step back and briefly look at the history of collecting and women collectors and how Doris fits into that story. Although perhaps not as well known as their male counterparts, women throughout history were collectors and patrons of art. In many cases, they occupied positions of political, religious, and cultural power, and their collections of art and architecture were an extension of their power and prestige, a physical embodiment of their wealth, status, and ability to influence. Art was a way to create a legacy, something that outlasted the dynasty, rule, or lifetime of the collector. In the 18th century, Jeanne Antoinette Poussin, more commonly referred to as Madame de Pompadour, a member of the French intelligentsia, a creative artist in her own right, and as official mistress of King Louis XV, in essence a politician, became known as a great collector. She recognized the potential art and collecting had to enforce the authority of the French monarchy, and to give legitimacy to rulers, as well as to inspire, and to help establish France as an arbiter of art, fashion, culture, and luxurious taste. Madame de Pompadour's lasting contributions include her support of the Gobelin tapestry manufactory and her support in development of the Royal Sèvres porcelain factory. And the distinctive vibrant pink used in many Sèvres pieces bears her name, Rose Pompadour. Madame de Pompadour was very conscious of the power of her collection, and as you can see in these paintings, was often painted surrounded by objects she collected. Madame de Pompadour's legacy continued with women like Bertha Palmer, Isabella Stewart Gardner, Belle de Costa Green, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, and Peggy Guggenheim, just a few of the women in the 19th and 20th centuries whose collectors' eyes amassed significant collections that are now part of museums and cultural institutions that we enjoy today. Which brings us to Doris Duke. As mentioned earlier, Doris was not really considered to be a collector during her lifetime, and was certainly not accumulating the type of collections like other well-known contemporaries were. As early as 1968, Doris, through the Newport Restoration Foundation, began acquiring houses and restoring them, to seed what is now arguably the largest collection of 18th century vernacular, or everyday, architecture in the United States. She also established the Whitehorn House Museum in 1971 and began acquiring a significant collection of 18th century Newport furniture and decorative arts. Her focus on 18th century Newport architecture and culture has shaped the city of Newport and has helped us to tell a more comprehensive story about early Newport through the material culture of the collections. And at Shangri-La, Doris's home in Hawaii, her interest in and appreciation for the arts and cultures of the Islamic world in South Asia resulted in a significant collection, much of which was purchased during buying trips across the region. Like many of her contemporaries who were interested in quote-unquote exotic cultures of what was called in general terms the East, Doris explored Spain, Morocco, Egypt, Syria, Iran, Central Asia, India, and parts of Southeast Asia, and purchased objects to bring back to the United States. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she was less interested in the monetary value of the objects, and her collecting habits were more of a reflection of her particular taste and whatever appealed to her. So when we look at Rough Point, it is a little more difficult to understand her particular collecting motivations. Did she purchase to strictly complement what was already there? Did she select objects based on their age and value as quote-unquote antiques? Looking at the provenance, or previous ownership and history of the objects, reveals some clues. The collection at Rough Point is eclectic and features stately English portraiture, sumptuous Flemish and French tapestries, ornate European furniture, and vibrant Chinese export porcelain, carefully selected over a lifetime, and one that points to her distinctive personality and Doris's many, many interests. Rough Point was Doris's home, not just a collector's showcase, and while we do not know her motivations, the home is filled with objects that had personal significance and point to a strong sense of nostalgia and sentimentality. The home is in many ways an homage to her parents, James and Annaline, and is filled with items both collected. There are also objects throughout the home that were gifts from friends, family, and close confidants. Doris had a curiosity about other places and was passionate about travel, and she purchased items during her travels to bring back to live with her at home at Rough Point. And she also purchased objects from auctions, often from the collection of other women collectors, many of whom were contemporaries of her mother and/or had homes in Newport. Let's now take a closer look at a grouping of objects in the Yellow Room. This room in particular has not changed significantly over the years, and from what we understand, Doris did not use the space very much for living or entertaining. It was more of a showcase. To the left and to the right of the door separating the Yellow Room from the Great Hall, there are a pair of gilded screens, a pair of French 18th century sofas, and a pair of delicate neoclassical side tables. The side table on the left bears the monogram E, which stands for Ekaterine, or in English, Catherine. These pair of tables belonged to Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, and likely came from her state palace. Born into a Prussian noble family, Catherine became the most powerful person in Russia after overthrowing her husband and ruled decisively for 3 decades. She was known as an enlightened monarch because of her support of educational reforms and the arts. While she wielded power, she also amassed an important national art collection. In fact, Catherine approached collecting with the same single-minded determination she approached gaining power and increasing Russia's dominance and ability to compete with other European states. In 1764, she acquired a collection of 225 old master paintings and established the Hermitage, a museum of art and culture. And she continued to acquire on a large scale, including François Boucher's Rest on the Flight into Egypt from the sale of Madame de Pompadour's collection. Today, the Hermitage is the second largest art museum in the world and is one of the most visited. She also amassed a large collection of decorative arts. For Catherine, the collection was an important symbol of Russia's cultural importance and, arguably, a way for Catherine to establish herself as an equal to her masculine counterparts and other rulers. Doris acquired these tables during a buying trip to Europe in 1938. And it is likely they came to Rough Point sometime in the late 1950s or early 1960s. We're not sure if Doris acquired these pieces because they belonged to Catherine the Great, or if she admired her, but we can imagine that she may have. Behind each occasional table is a gilded screen, although each were originally golden doors for the Galleria dell'Oro from the Palazzo Chirica Cataldi, now the Chamber of Commerce in Genoa, Italy. And this set ended up at Bois Doré in Newport, at the house of Eleanor Dorrance Ingersoll. Like many of the other women we are going to briefly discuss today, Eleanor was an heiress, a socialite, and a philanthropist. She was a Campbell Soup heiress and served as a director of the Campbell Soup Company. She was also the president of the Preservation Society of Newport County and was a trustee of the Museum of the Rhode Island School of Design. Doris knew Eleanor and her daughter, Dorrance Hamilton. Eleanor's collection was sold at auction after her death in 1977, and Doris purchased this set there and then displayed them as screens, as you see today. And part of Eleanor's collection also ended up at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, including this painting. Most of the objects we are going to look at today that were acquired from other women's collections fall into the category of objets d'art, or decorative arts. If we look back to the example of Madame de Pompadour, part of her lasting legacy is her contributions to the field of decorative arts. The decorative arts covers a broad category of objects that can be pragmatic and at the same time fanciful, and serve a specific function and are useful, as well as being inherently beautiful. In the 19th and 20th centuries, decorative arts were often seen as being of lesser importance than fine arts, and often would be associated with feminine sensibilities and the feminized concept of decorating. In the West, there was an attempt to clearly delineate the feminine and masculine spheres, the masculine one being associated with business, commerce, and industry, and the feminine one responsible for the domestic space and the morality of all those inside that space. Women made decisions about what went inside the home and how the rooms were arranged. And this is where we see an interesting but contradictory attitude towards women as collectors. While there are many instructive manuals on how to create the ideal home throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, there are also many examples in popular culture disparaging and making fun of women who collect. You can see in this cartoon, for example, the clear gender distinctions between the rational, masculine collecting and the frivolous, ridiculous, female collecting. Although this cartoon is from the 19th century, we can see a similar attitude towards Doris's collecting in the 20th century. The Society Press was critical of Doris's collecting and dismissed her collecting as long-distance shopping sprees of a spoiled heiress. One particular article from 1938 mocked Doris's Shangri-La collection. Quote, "It seems almost incredible that there could be a square inch of space left in the comparatively small house for another piece of bric-a-brac." Today, Doris's collecting efforts are recognized for their scholarly importance and value in creating collections, especially as seen in her collection of Southeast Asian art, now in public institutions like the British Museum, British Library, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, and her collection of Islamic art on display and interpreted at Shangri-La. Today, many of the possessions and private collections of women make up the collections of large American museums, including the National Gallery of Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. These were beautiful, precious, and in some cases rare objects that these women surrounded themselves with and that they bequeathed to or were acquired by public museums after their deaths. Before moving on from the Yellow Room, let's take a look at the pair of sofas, which are next to the side tables. On first glance, the sofas blend into the background next to the more spectacular tables and screens. And there's nothing particularly remarkable about these sofas. But the woman they belonged to was a fascinating woman, and one of Doris's friends. Thelma Chrysler Foy was an heiress. Her father was a Chrysler car manufacturer. She was a glamorous woman who collected fine and decorative arts. Many pieces from her collection were gifted to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and she also helped seed the Met's Costume Institute with her early gifts of important haute couture designs. There are a few other pieces from Thelma's collection here at Rough Point, but they are in the room upstairs, and we will take a closer look at them in just a little bit. While Thelma was not part of Doris's close circle of friends, she and her husband were part of the same social circles that Doris occupied in the 1930s and the 1940s. Now let's move on to the morning room. Doris continued to update and refine this room well into the late 1980s, and many of the objects in this room are Dutch, including the 2 sets of ornate marquetry side chairs. These chairs came from the collection of Jessie Woolworth Donahue, the department store heiress, and aunt of Barbara Hutton. Doris and Barbara Hutton's contentious relationship is for another story, but Barbara was very close to her Aunt Jessie. Jessie eventually purchased a home in Newport, renamed it Rockcliffe, which is the house next door to Rough Point to the north. Doris purchased these chairs at auction after Jessie passed away. Continue on to the dining room, we come to a regal tapestry with royal provenance. The other tapestries in this room were acquired by James Duke, but this tapestry was added by Doris much later, in 1962. Doris Duke purchased it at the auction of the estate of Eleanor Elkins Rice, an heiress, philanthropist, adventuress, and collector. Eleanor experienced great tragedy in her life. She was on the Titanic's ill-fated voyage in 1912. She survived, but her husband and son did not. After the death of her husband and son, Eleanor finished the construction of Miramar, located a few houses away from Rough Point on Bellevue Avenue. She eventually married the explorer Alexander Hamilton Rice, and they spent their summers in Newport at Miramar. They became famous or notorious for their explorations of the Amazon, and wild stories involving cannibals were frequently in the press. Although there is some doubt as to the validity of these stories, they certainly helped Alexander Rice's reputation and funding opportunities for further explorations, and Eleanor, rather prudently, reportedly stayed safe on a boat during many of these expeditions. While Eleanor's story may not be well known today, her legacy lives on through the objects from her art collection, which eventually ended up in museums, like Rough Point. Also in the dining room is one of the oldest objects in the Rough Point collection, an unassuming jar. The jar dates to the Song dynasty and also marks a clear distinction in Doris Duke's taste for Chinese decorative arts from that of her parents. While her parents collected brightly colored pieces of Chinese porcelain meant for the Western market and Western tastes, Doris did not stick to this traditional Western collecting practice, and, is the case in this example, added other pieces to the collection that fell outside the typical. This jar came from the auction of Mrs. Seton Porter. She was an heiress, formerly Fredericka Berwind, part of the Berwind coal mining family, who had close ties to Newport. Her aunt and uncle owned the Elms in Newport. Although this object came from Fredericka's estate, we do not know yet much about the prior provenance or even that Fredericka collected it herself. It may just have been in her house at the time of her death. There is another object from Fredericka's collection upstairs in Doris's bedroom, and we will take a look at that soon. Let's continue on to the stair hall and briefly pause before we continue upstairs. There are 4 grand tapestries in the stair hall depicting the military exploits of Scipio Africanus, a Roman general. Packed with action and drama, they are also one of the earliest purchases Doris made for Rough Point in 1958. They came from the estate of Cornelia Harriman Gerry, who was a railroad heiress. As we continue upstairs, let's briefly pause in front of this painting by English artist Sir Joshua Reynolds. The Duchess of Marlborough came to Rough Point in 1970, and Doris positioned her prominently, where she's easy to admire from the staircase landing. Caroline Spencer, the 4th Duchess of Marlborough, is related to the current English royal family. Before Rough Point, the painting was on display at Meadowbrook Hall in Michigan and was part of the collection of Matilda Dodge Wilson. Matilda was a remarkable woman. She was an immigrant who came from a humble background and became one of the wealthiest women in the United States. She was a philanthropist, the first female lieutenant governor of Michigan, art collector, preservationist, supporter of women's rights, businesswoman, successful horse breeder, and founder of Oakland University. Her home, Meadowbrook Hall, is today open as a museum. Continuing upstairs, let's first visit the cozy pine room. Although this is more of an informal space and one in which Doris diligently practiced the piano, it too is filled with special objects. Alongside the comfortable, reupholstered sofa, and on the mantel under the painting gifted to Doris by her great friend, Alida Morris McBean, are some charming Meissen pieces. These 3 objects, featuring elephants, came from the collection of Ella Morris de Peyster. Ella was a wealthy, independent woman with a collector's eye, particularly for 18th century French objects. After her divorce, she took back her maiden name and moved to Newport, to Crossways, the former home of society leader Mamie Fish. Quite a few objects from her collection are now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Doris acquired these particular pieces for Rough Point in 1958. And our last stop is Doris Duke's bedroom, the space that most closely reflects her personality and is filled with objects that have personal and sentimental meaning. It is tempting to attribute more personal significance to all the objects in the space, even objects that come from collectors she may not have personally known. As we discussed in an earlier episode of Myth Mystique, this room was originally Nanoline Duke's room, and while Doris added objects to the space, the majority are her mother's. The embroidered panel in the bed was her mother's, for example, and it is possible that the bed itself once belonged to Margaret Daisy Van Allen, an heiress, art collector, society hostess, and philanthropist, and was purchased from the auction of Daisy's Newport estate, Wakehurst. In the bathroom, the striking dressing table is the only significant object added to the space by Doris, and it too came from the auction of Fredericka Berwind Porter. Above the mantel in the bedroom is an oil painting by Renoir. The painting stands out because it is very different from the old masters on display throughout the rest of the house, and it is one of the very few modern pieces on display at Rough Point. This painting also came from the estate of Thelma Chrysler Foy. And on the table below are objects that have personal meaning for Doris. Many were gifts from friends, family, and close confidants, and/or were picked up at markets during her travels. 2 of the porcelain boxes on the table, a snuff box and a matchbox, also came from Thelma Chrysler Foy's collection. And perhaps the presence of these objects on this particular table points to a closer friendship between Doris and Thelma than has been previously thought. One of the most striking aspects of the bedroom, besides the bold purple and yellow colors, is the proliferation of mother-of-pearl objects. Doris's passion for collecting mother-of-pearl seems to have been sparked from a trip to Damascus in 1938. In this photograph, Doris is examining mother-of-pearl dressers. The first mother-of-pearl object Doris purchased for Rough Point was this Peruvian bookcase and desk. And this fabulous mother-of-pearl furniture suite was originally commissioned by a French royal, but later belonged to the makeup mogul, art collector, and philanthropist Helena Rubenstein. Helena and Doris may have been passing acquaintances. Besides their shared taste in mother-of-pearl, both were savvy businesswomen in a time where women were still barred from prestigious roles in business and were often not taken seriously. Both also had an eye for collecting that went beyond the typical hobby collector. Helena's collecting interests, too, were outside the Western norm for the period. Besides collecting Western art, she built a significant collection of African and Oceanic art. Helena was excellent at marketing herself and her brand, and she almost single-handedly made Helena Rubenstein cosmetics ubiquitous in America. She popularized red lipstick and had many innovative products. At a time when wearing makeup was still seen as not quite respectable, Helena made wearing makeup an empowering act for women in the early 20th century. As a side note, and perhaps pointing to Helena Rubenstein's popularity, Doris had a Helena Rubenstein compact in her possession at the time of her death. Here's a 1929 commercial showcasing Helena's salon and her innovative treatments and makeup.
Every woman, no matter what her age, can look from 10 to 15 years younger.
Her slogans included, "There are no ugly women, only lazy ones," and "Beauty is power." Helena also understood how to use art and art patronage to shape her image. Contemporary artists from Andy Warhol to Pablo Picasso painted her image, and she worked with the top haute couture houses to develop her distinctive, fashionable wardrobe. Helena's legacy today extends beyond her contributions to the beauty industry, and her vast art collection is now in the collection of many other museums. While there are similarities between Doris Duke and Helena Rubenstein, and we can imagine that Doris Duke may have seen a kindred spirit in Helena, or at least admired her work, unlike Doris, Helena's wealth was self-made, and as an immigrant working-class Jewish woman, she did not enjoy the same privilege as Doris and faced challenges that Doris did not have to navigate. Although there are important differences in the women we met today, from heiresses to a makeup mogul to a Russian empress, there are some key things that they have in common. All had a keen knowledge of fashion and how to use fashion to their advantage and to shape their public personas. All had a predilection for travel, and all, whether they came originally from humble backgrounds or were heiresses, possessed plenty of money, and with that, power and privilege. We are all collectors, many of us from childhood, and our collections grow and change over time. Collections are a reflection of what is important to us, what we value, what we save, and what we remember. When we look at a collection, especially one left for public enjoyment, we may appreciate the beauty, artistry, and/or the craftsman or womanship of the objects. But a collection is also a lens through which the collector saw the world. A collection reveals as much as it conceals. When you visit Rough Point today, you are gaining insight into Doris Duke, as well as the taste, values, and even personality of others who lived with the objects before her. Thank you for joining us this evening to take a closer look at Doris Duke's collection at Rough Point and to find out more about the women collectors she collected from. We'd love to hear from you, your questions, your comments, your suggestions for future episodes, so feel free to leave your thoughts below the video. Rough Point Museum is currently open to the public, as is Whitehorn House Museum, so you're welcome to come visit in person. Or you can continue your exploration of the collections from your own home, online, and through videos like this one. If you'd like to support the work we do, please visit newportrestoration.org/support to find out more. Thank you, be well, and have a good night.